Hello and welcome. After this introduction, what follows is one of my older videos titled The Golden Age. And the title is because, as I have taught in many videos, is that the Bible teaches that the earth is not just 6,000 years ago old, but could potentially be 6 million, 6 billion. We don't know how old it is. But many ages of time went by before Adam and Eve were created and placed in the Garden of Eden. And in those ages, the primary purpose of those ages was to allow evil to be born and for it to grow and for it to be fully mature. So then when God placed Adam and Eve in the garden, he would have this tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So the knowledge of evil had to have been perfected. It had to have matured. It had to have become absolute. So absolute darkness, as opposed to God's absolute light, had to be in existence before Adam and Eve could be made. Now, if you want to delve into that topic deeper, then I would suggest you go and watch all of the videos in my Bible history playlist and study those videos along with your King James Bible. Lately, history as we are taught in this world is a lie, and just about everything else, okay? Even in the Christian circles, which tell you that Earth is only 6,000 years old, that is not biblical. So most of the information that you get even from the church is not from the Bible. So I wanted to give you some real history, and this is the reason why. The reason why I'm titling this video is Luciferia, not Tartaria, is that lately in the past few years, 2-3 years in particular, there have been a lot of people that have been talking about this worldwide empire called Tartaria. And they said that was destroyed in a flood, a massive flood, which left the whole earth covered in mud. And all these cities, a lot of the modern cities, they were actually discovered. And, there may be truth in that. And when we look back at the time before Adam, in which was the last worldwide empire that existed, that was a true empire, was the empire of Lucifer. And if you want to hear the true history of Lucifer, who was a man and not an angel, then you should watch my Lucifer videos and also my history videos, and then you will see the biblical proof that tells you quite clearly that Lucifer was a man. He was not an angel, and men existed on the earth long before Adam did. Okay, so this empire that existed, you could title it Luciferia. And of course, at the end of that age, as we read in Genesis 1:2, the earth became without form and void. That means it was turned into a ruined wasteland. And how did it become a ruined wasteland? Because God brought judgment upon Lucifer and upon that world, as we read in Jeremiah 4, in verses 23 to 26, that those cities that were built by Lucifer and his contemporaries were broken down by the Lord and by his fierce anger. And they were covered with this massive universal flood that was even bigger than the flood of Noah. So, of course, in that situation, it left a lot of mud that covered those cities. Okay, so this idea that there have been cities that existed, that a lot of the architecture that you see even today has not been built by any modern man is I would agree with it, okay? But where I have a problem with this Tartaria is to say that this existed only till about 200 years ago, and this flooding happened something like 200 years ago. That I'm not sure. I do not believe that is the case. In any case, I do know that the flood of Lucifer was many thousand years ago. And even the first cities that were built by the children of Adam, as for example, in Genesis 4, we read that Cain, when he was, judged by God, and he was sent away from Eden, from that area, he went to the east in the land of Nod, and he built a city. And, that verse of scripture has always kind of, left me in bewildered, because I'm thinking, okay, at that time, really there could not have been a whole lot of people. There may have been a few thousand or whatever, but that is not a sufficient number to go and build a city. And where did they get all the materials, and where did they get all that is involved in building a city? It is a very, very complex undertaking. And then I just recently, it's starting to hit me that, yeah, these were cities that were built in the time of Lucifer. And Cain, for example, probably found a city, and then they set about to reclaim it and call it their own. And even Adam was given a command to replenish the earth, okay, which means to refill it. And they did that using a lot of these structures that already existed, even at the time of Nimrod after the flood. the story of Babylon, the story of Assur, which was Assyria, some of these major empires. And you know what? When we read the Bible, we don't get an idea of the scale of these places. They were gigantic, okay? And even that Babel, that place was something that he probably discovered, even including the tower. The tower itself may have been something that Lucifer was using. You know, when he said, I'm going to ascend up into heaven, it might have been something like a launch pad or something that they discovered, and they set about to repair it. There was, of course, some kind of very advanced technology that was involved in these ventures, which technology we don't even have to this very day, because we cannot replicate these buildings that are in existence even to this very, very day. Buildings, for one, they don't last that long. And if they have lasted for thousands of years, then they were certainly made with technologies and using materials that we don't even have access to this very day. Okay, so this is a little screen video that you saw. Is somebody has made a video about Tartaria. I'll put a link in the description. So what I wanted to just emphasize here is that there has not been, I would call, the ancient worldwide empire that existed before the time of Adam as Luciferia. Okay, and if you were to divide history into ages, then there will be four at least that predated Adam. Number one would be called the Golden Age. This is the time when God began the creation, which he tells us he stretched out the heavens, he founded the earth, he made the sons of God who were humans, and he placed them on the earth. He gave them to him, to those people, and those are the people, including one called Lucifer, that built these worlds right across the earth. And that's why you see the evidence of architecture, which is similar right across the earth, because that time they only had the one culture and one civilization. Okay. And then, of course, after the Golden Age, when the angels first sinned, led by the anointed cherub, then we slip into the Silver Age when things began to deteriorate. The story of the anointed cherub, who was an angelic being, is told in Ezekiel 28, and again, it is in many of my Bible history videos. He is the one that started something that is very, very significant in the world, which is the use of money and trading and merchandising. Okay, that is the first sin mentioned in the Bible, is the sin of merchandising, of buying and selling. And that is the last sin that is going to be judged in Revelation chapter 18. See the symmetry in the Bible? When you know the Bible, its symmetry will blow you away. I would like to interject here and clarify that although most people have heard that the Satan is a fallen angel and he is Lucifer, and he is the angel of Ezekiel 28. This is not correct. In the Bible, there are actually three creatures that were instrumental in the birth of evil, in the growth of evil, and in the maturing of evil into absolute evil, which happened in Satan. The first one of them is called the anointed cherub, which is an angelic being, and he is in Ezekiel 28. The second one is Lucifer, who was not an angel and he was not a beast. He is a man. Okay, his story we read in Isaiah chapter 14. And the third one is Satan, whose story actually begins in Genesis chapter 3, and it goes right into the book of Revelation. Satan is neither an angel nor is he a man. He is a beast, as the Bible makes it very, very clear. Okay, so these are three different people. These are three different creatures. And it is because they're all lumped into one that everything about them that you might have heard is actually false, because it is not from the Bible. One more point I want to make here quickly without really elaborating on it is that the age of the angels, or that world, that empire that existed when the angels were ruling God's creation, it could be called the age of the Titans, okay? And one day I'm going to do a video where I will explain why I believe that the angel and their worlds were what in mythology is called the world of the Titans. So that was the Silver Age. After the Silver Age, these angels were judged and they were cast down into hell, okay, into Tartarus. Maybe the word Tartaria comes from that place. It's been a hellish civilization that has existed on the earth, in which they had these, all kinds of creatures, humans, giants, dwarves, trolls, you name it, all of these fantasy kind of creatures and hybrids and dragons, and all these existed right here. And maybe that's where it comes from, because it is the hell that those angels unleashed on the earth that led to these places. So they are locked up in the bottom of hell, which is called Tartarus in Greek, or Tartaru. Okay, and I most likely think that the word Tartaria originally came from that this was the civilization of the evil ones, not of the godly and righteous people. After these angels were judged, then came the Bronze Age. The Bronze Age was the age of Lucifer. It was the age of humans on the earth, where the angels were no longer their competition, and that Bronze Age ended. In that Bronze Age also was created someone by the name of Satan. Okay, he is a dragon. He is a serpentine dragon, and that story will be picked up and told another time. So, but this age was mainly the age of these humans. They were led by Lucifer, and it is their civilization that existed right across the earth, and it is their remains that we find to this very day. And therefore, I would like to say that this Tartaria was not built by Russians or Mongols or somebody, that it was actually referring to something that was much older, even not to Nimrod. It was before his time, not even to Adam or Cain. It was before their time. It was built by Lucifer and people that came before him and after him, and that's why I would call it Luciferia. And finally, at the end of that, when Lucifer himself fell from heaven and he was cast into the bottomless pit where he is today, therefore, after that came the age of the dragons, led by the serpentine dragon Satan. That would be the Iron Age which we are living in today. This Iron Age began at the end of the Silver Age, and it predated, even its origins predate the arrival of Adam. So those are the four ages: gold, silver, bronze, and iron. I'm not going to go into detail here, but I'm just going to play that video again for you, which I recorded about a little while ago, and it is titled The Golden Age. But I just wanted to introduce to you today the idea of this worldwide empire, which I am calling Luciferia, not Tartaria. Hello and welcome. This is Paul Sandhu. So today I wanted to actually talk about some Bible history. Talk about history in general, but with a focus on history of creation as it is recorded in the pages of the Bible. So this video is actually meant for people who are familiar with the Bible and those who may not be. One thing, however, is for certain, that there is what you might call a secret history in the Bible, which is buried in its pages, which is not commonly known or taught. For one thing, the Bible nowhere teaches that the earth or creation is only 6,000 years old. It actually talks about more than one creation having been created and then destroyed at some point in the past. It speaks about many different types of creatures, some supernatural like angels, and some even categories of angels such as the cherubim, which are even higher than so there's a whole class of angels it talks about. It talks about other worlds, existing in heavenly places, existing under the earth, on the waters. So it talks about those things. It talks about some very advanced technologies, as for example, a lot of people are familiar with the story about Ezekiel's wheels, his vision that he saw. Okay, that's technology. It talks about great energies, such as witnessed on Mount Sinai when Moses took the Israelites in the wilderness. They say that Mount Sinai, when God descended upon it, was entirely on fire, and the smoke rose up like that of a furnace. Okay, that's just one example. Fire energy in the Bible is used a lot. Okay, and then about electricity, about lightning and thunder, talking about software and having things being created by the use of technology, because everything we are told is made by His Word, which of course would be the equivalent of a software program. Speaks about different and strange creatures, some humanoid like giants, like even Titan-like, because in Amos you can read about these giants whose height is mentioned as being like the height of cedars. So these would be something like the mythological titans, which were much bigger in stature than even giants like the giant Goliath, which we also read about in the Bible. It talks about some strange unions that took place between these creatures that are called the sons of God and between the daughters of men. It talks about what's in heaven, about the throne of God and all the mysterious and strange, strange for us, energies, etc. Spirit in the Bible, it essentially translates to energy. Okay, that's what the word, literal meaning would be something like the word energy in the English language, because even the Bible, it tells us that our bodies are kept alive by the Spirit. So that which energizes or animates a human body is the Spirit, is the energy. Okay, that's the energy of life, which is Spirit. So it talks about that. Jesus himself was a very, very unique person in that the energies that surrounded him, for example, the cloaking, his cloaking abilities, you could say. See, now that we are living in an age of technology, we can understand these concepts a lot better than perhaps our forefathers could, because we can understand in how many times in the Bible, especially in the book of John, you can see that Jesus hid himself and he walked through the midst of a crowd. He was cloaked. They couldn't see him. Okay? He walked upon water. He commanded the sea and it became calm. Okay? He raised the dead. He said, Lazarus, come forth. So he was walking in the street and a woman touched him, and energy, the Bible tells us, left his body, and this woman was healed. So we can see, numerous instances. We speak about, like I said, about these humanoid type creatures such as giants, but also about beasts such as dragons. Okay? Dragons are not just found in the Game of Thrones. The dragons actually are mentioned in the Bible a lot earlier than that. Or Leviathan, or Behemoth, unicorns, satyrs. So there is much in the Bible which you are not going to hear when you go to church, because what you hear in church is essentially nothing biblical. Okay? It's nothing biblical. So based upon that, and now to give you a little background about myself, I was born and raised in India. So I am very well familiar with, a lot of people on YouTube, for example, they talk about Indian mythology such as the Mahabharata, and they talk about these fantastic weapons. A lot of people say it was nuclear weapons. I would say nuclear weapons are not what is being mentioned there, but it is something of an entirely different nature and a magnitude of power much greater that is being described in there, which is more like energy weapons of some sort. Okay, so having understood that from a very young age, like I was brought up with that, with these stories, and because they're not just mythology in India, they are still believed to be the truth, and they are taught to kids from a very young age. In school, for example, I had to even learn Sanskrit, which and I can read Hindi, and I also have the cultural background to understand these stories perhaps different than a Westerner would. Okay, now what I want to state here is that in these mythologies, whether they are Greek mythology or Hindu mythology or any other type of Norse mythology, Celtic mythology, etc., there is a great deal of historical truth in them. Okay, there really is. There's a great deal of historical truth to be found in them, and also in the Bible. Now, having studied the Bible for some 30 years now, like I said, and also being knowledgeable about books such as the Mahabharata and also about Greek mythology, etc., I am very uniquely positioned to make a comparison between them. And I will show you what's common as far as histories are concerned. I would say prehistory rather than what we consider to be history going back a few thousand years, history of civilization. I'm talking about the civilizations and the worlds and the ages that came before them. and the histories of prehistory, you could say, that we can compare what we read about in mythology, for example, and then in the Bible. We can do some sort of comparison, and piecing all these pieces together, we can make a really, really good history book. It is very interesting. It is like better, in my opinion, than any book that Tolkien might have written, like the Lord of the Rings, for example. Or actually, Tolkien's work, by the way, is interesting in that his earlier work, which predates chronologically at least the Lord of the Rings series, is called the Silmarillion, which is a history of creation, essentially, and of the different ages of time that came and went before the stories of the Lord of the Rings. And Tolkien's stories are pretty much based almost entirely upon the Bible, okay? And that is something which most people may not understand, or because they've been led to believe that it's based on Norse mythology or Celtic mythology. Those stories are not. And from time to time, I have done some videos in the past comparing Tolkien stories to the Bible, and I will mention it as we go along, because I think his legendarium, as it's called, it's also something of a has some historical truths in it, because ultimately any information that exists, it has to have a basis in truth, okay? Imagination is not something which is created. Imagining something is imaging something that already exists, okay? So it's like tapping into this information which is stored wherever it is stored, and from there we get this knowledge, which people think that it's a fiction writer like Tolkien, he actually created it, or this is the first time that these stories have been heard. It is not the case at all. Tolkien himself admitted that he kind of went into some sort of altered state, let's say, and these stories would come to him. Okay, so this is a person tapping into some information, they're downloading it into their mind, and then they're putting it on paper. All right, leaving that aside for now, according to the Bible and according to mythologies as well, there have been at least like 4 ages of time in which certain worlds were created, they were built, and they were destroyed and rebuilt and destroyed and rebuilt and destroyed. Okay, what we have today is a world that is built upon the ruins of many worlds that have come and gone. Of that, there is no doubt whatsoever, because the evidence of these ruins is littered right across the face of the earth. Okay, from Russia right down to Argentina, we can find them. From Australia to Canada, they're all over. There's remains of these worlds that once existed, that were built by some civilizations that were far more technologically advanced than even we are today. There's a little video that I'll play for you about the largest boulder that has been moved in modern times, and it weighs some 300 tons, okay? 300 tons. But if you go, there are so many sites in this world where you'll see cut stones, even in buildings or just lying there by themselves, that weigh like upwards of 1,000 tons or more. So, in our technology, as you watch this video clip later, you'll come to a realization that, hey, if we're having such a challenge moving a 300-ton boulder, which is estimated to be 300 tons, maybe less even, we would never have the ability to move stones that are like or even cut them, or to move them that are 1,000 tons. It is an impossibility. In China, for example, there is a site where they have a quarry where there are stones that they estimate are like some 1,700 tons. Some might even be like 2,000 tons. Right? So the evidence of prehistory civilizations having existed is abundant in our world, on the earth, okay? And therefore, what we need to do is, the purpose of studying history is not to believe all the nonsense that we are taught by mainstream academia, but rather to actually spend some time in learning and understanding what really went on. Is that information available to us? And I would say that this information, like I said, you can read in the Bible, and then you can also have some pieces that are in mythologies. From my personal experience, I would say ultimately in the Bible we have a complete history, because it begins with the beginning of creation and it goes into time eternal. Actually, it goes into eternity, which means that there is no time there any longer. So it begins before time began, and it ends, at least what we are told, when there is time is no longer. So from that respect, it is quite a complete history. Now, whether one believes it or not is a different story, you know. But like I said, the story itself is very, very interesting. And because, you know, when we had stories such as, for example, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, a lot of people that have done research in the traditional sites of these places, they now conclude, you know, yes, there is a great deal of evidence, as the Bible says, you know, sulfur rained down from above, fire and brimstone, which is sulfur, and it really reduced these places to dust, that even today there is evidence for these events having occurred. Okay, so that is again an example of a technology which we still to this day probably do not have, that we can reduce a whole city or town, and these places were not small, to like ashes in a matter of a few hours at the very most. Okay, so these stories, which are, like I said, and that's something similar is also mentioned in the Mahabharata, by the way, where they talk about this war in which everything just turned to dust, that this fire rained down from some weapon was employed, which rained fire down with the ferocity of 1,000 suns, and it reduced everything to dust. Okay, so these stories are there. Are they just stories? Something just came out of somewhere, nobody had ever heard these before? No, I would say they're based on some historical truth. So today I just want to talk about the 4 ages of time that are in the Bible and that are also mentioned in mythologies. And generally, the Hindus have their own names for them, but we'll go by the Greek names for the ages, which are based upon the names of precious and base metals: gold, silver, bronze, and iron. That these are 4 different ages. Okay. Now, if you were to divide like human history as we know it, like the history of civilization, going back in time, let's say we can say the Babylonian, Egyptian, then the Persian, Greeks, Romans, etc. These were the dominant powers over different periods of time. Okay, so they did different things. Each power in their own time, they built their own world, and again, because of the wars, etc., that they got involved in later on, they were all destroyed at a later time, and then, you know, somebody else came around and they rebuilt them. So that's what happened in the past, but in a much bigger scale. The first age, which is called the Golden Age, it was essentially an age of building only. It was not an age of destruction. It was an age of building and of creation. And the following 3 ages, the silver, the bronze, and the iron age, these are ages of primarily of rebuilding and destruction. In each case, the destruction was greater than the building part of it. So what we are left with at the end of each age is more ruins than that age began with. The Golden Age, from a biblical perspective, it gives it it defines it rather well. Okay, the beginning of creation and what happened. In mythology, for example, in Greek mythology or even in Hindu mythology, it is a little more, what should I say, unclear as to what exactly transpired. Okay, because the Greeks kind of say that there was this void. So they essentially don't begin quite at the beginning. They have left out a certain period of time, which was the time of construction only and not of destruction. Okay, so, but in the Bible, in Genesis 1:1, we read, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. Okay, and this is a very, very interesting one single verse of scripture. The way it is worded in particularly the 1611 authorized version of the English Bible, it reads, in the beginning God created the heaven. Okay, and after the heaven there is a comma. So essentially what it is telling us is that the first act of creation by the Creator, who is God, He created this one singular place called the heaven, which in the Bible is described as the city of God. This is the place from which God rules and reigns over all of His creation. Okay, so this was the very first place. A lot of mistranslations, they translate this verse as, in the beginning God created the heavens, plural, and the earth. But like I said, in the authorized version, it is a singular heaven, it is not plural, and it is followed by a comma, so that there's another clause which tells us that even the earth and the heaven were not created simultaneously, that the very beginning of creation begins with the heaven as in a city, which is both the abode of God and, let's say, His administrative center, the greatest technological marvel anywhere in all of creation, from which He administers and controls and manages all of His creation. So that makes kind of sense. Like in every person, like a city, for example, you don't just build a city like, fully finished right at the beginning. Or you're going to build a building. First we draw the plans, and then you build the construction office, then all the other drawings, etc. are created, and then the foundation is dug, and then eventually the building comes into existence. And this is how the Bible describes the creation, how the creation progressed, that it was not done instantaneously. Okay, that story about the 6 days, that everything happened just in 6 days, and that is not correct. Okay, we'll talk about the 6 days later. But going back in the distant past, I'm talking like, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, billions, I have no idea how many years of time ago, there was this God, the person called God, who is the Creator, who has a proper name in the Bible. His proper name is Jehovah. He created. He began the process of creation. Okay? This is something very, very important to understand, that creation has a beginning, but the Creator does not. The creation exists in time, but the Creator does not. Therefore, time is also one of the creations of the Creator. So in the beginning, He created the heaven. Then it says, in the beginning, God created the heaven, and the earth. So, like I said, the mystery of creation, the history of the mystery of creation, okay? The history of the mystery of creation. Wow, that sounds good. The history of the mystery of creation, as it is found in the pages of the Bible, it gives us the exact chronology in which things happened. So first came the heaven, the city of God. After that, before God made the earth, He created some living, intelligent creatures, namely the race of angels and another race of beings called the sons of God. Okay, now, I am not going to go into detail here, but the common misinformation teaching about this topic of the sons of God in the Bible, especially in Genesis chapter 6, is that they were fallen angels. That is not what the Bible teaches. Okay, there are many videos on my channel that explains to you who these sons of God were. But these sons of God were human-like at the very least, or you could say even human flesh and blood creatures that were created along with the angels, or perhaps shortly after the angels, before the earth was created. Okay, so here we have the chronology happening: the heaven, then at least these two intelligent creatures, one being the angels, who are spirit, and the other being the sons of God, who are flesh. And this gets me into some sort of deep theological, doctrinal understanding why spirit and flesh, why they had to be created from the very beginning. Which again, I'm not going to bother you, especially for a lot of people who are watching this who don't understand the Bible, but it had to be like that. So the first two races you created One was a race of spirit beings called the angels. The other one is a race of human flesh and blood, physical, corporeal beings called the sons of God. And after that, God created the earth. And so, as we read in the Bible, that the angels were already present, and the sons of God, who were, because they were going to exist as physical, corporeal creatures, for them a terrestrial world would be created. Angels are spirit beings. They don't need a terrestrial body to dwell upon. But the sons of God did. So God created the earth. And then in the book of Job, in chapter 38, verse 7, we read when God was asking Job a series of questions. He says, "Where was thou when I laid the foundations of the earth?" And he asked the question, when that question is concluded with this one sentence, when the sons of God, when the morning stars sang together, morning stars are angels, they sang. And music, again, is a very, very, it is found throughout the Bible, okay? And the role that music plays, even in our world today, as history goes back to the Bible, and it is found in it right from the very beginning. But again, something that I can't go into it because that is a topic in and of itself. Okay, so the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy. And again, when we look at the exact grammar and the exact wording of sentences, which is very important, most people don't pay much mind to grammar these days, but there is a purpose why we have grammar. It is to make certain distinctions and bring out certain meanings which would not be understood if we had no grammatical structure to language. So in that Job 38:7, it says, when the morning stars sang together, comma, that it begins a new clause, and all the sons of God shouted for joy. So again, that comma, it makes a distinction between this one group, the first clause whose subject were the angels, and the second clause whose subject is a different group of beings, the sons of God. So the sons of God are not angels, okay? Whether fallen or not, it doesn't matter. They weren't angels to begin with. That's why in Genesis 6, they were, just as an aside, that's why they had no problem, mating with the daughters of men, which is the daughters of Adam, and having children and everything else, And these, just to give you another context from mythology, these sons of God became the gods of the old worlds. Gods such as Zeus or Apollo, or in India, like, Ram or Krishna or Vishnu, Brahma, etc. These were all sons of God because, as is very, very apparent from all these mythologies, they were all flesh and blood. Okay? They were all flesh and blood. They were not like spirit creatures. They were not. They had the same fleshly desires as humans do. They wanted to, they lusted after women. They desired power. They liked food and wine and all those kind of things, okay? So they had all the human characteristics that the human failings that we see in people today, and that is because they were people. They were not angels, okay? So I just wanted to interject here that one of the questions that are raised by videos such as the one that is playing on the screen with all these megalithic structures that were they were actually built by some race of human-like creatures, okay? And the question is who they are. And from Greek mythology, etc., we have some vague stories about, Saturn swallowing his children and things, and these people like Zeus coming forth later on and such. However, in the Bible, the explanation is also there, that it is God who created this race of human-like beings. They're very much like us, yet they are somewhat different because they have, for one thing, they have much greater technological prowess and technological knowledge and understanding, and also, they were different in as far as their lifespans, etc., are concerned. But they were very much humans. So if you want to answer the question as to who were the gods of mythology that might have been instrumental in building all these ancient, pre-Adam civilizations, then that answer is more precise in the Bible than in any mythology. Sorry, I keep repeating this, but this is something because there has been so much false and wrong teaching on this topic that most people, they have a very hard time processing that the Bible teaches that human beings were before Adam and Eve were actually created, and they lasted many ages before Adam and Eve came around, and they built worlds whose ruins we see this very day. These worlds that exist, like in Machu Picchu, like in Egypt, like in China, in Russia, in India, all around the world, these worlds were not built by angels. Angels don't need worlds built of stone and brick, okay? Human beings do. So since we can quite easily understand that these worlds existed on this earth, they must have been built by some type of flesh and blood creatures, whether they were giants in stature or not, it doesn't matter. But they had to be flesh and blood. They were not like spirit creatures, because spirits do not need, like I said, abodes or residences made out of stone. Okay, they don't. So that's what these historical ruins, they are, of these worlds that existed back in the day before Adam and Eve, right here on the earth, built by human beings. One of the most famous of these humans being Lucifer, and that is again another teaching which is in the Bible. But people, when it plainly tells us that Lucifer was a man, yet all these preachers run around and tell you that, oh, Lucifer was an angel, Lucifer was an angel. That's why people have no understanding of biblical history, because they're not being taught the Bible. Okay, but the Bible is quite plain that Lucifer was a man. So I got a little bit ahead of myself, because I'm already talking about events that occurred in the Bronze and the Silver Ages. I have not yet mentioned the Golden Age. So today I just want to introduce you to the Golden Age, and then we'll continue talking about the Silver, the Bronze, and the Iron, the present Iron Age. And in the Golden Age began in Genesis 1 verse 1, which tells us, in the beginning God created the heaven being that it was his abode, and it is the most, like I said, the technological marvel wonder city that exists anywhere in the cosmos. Therefore, that was not a ruined wasteland. Okay, in Genesis chapter 1 verse 2 we read, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the water. So the picture that the Bible paints from Genesis 1:1, there's a great transition into Genesis 1:2. It paints a picture of a ruined wasteland existing on the earth in Genesis 1:2, where Genesis 1:1 tells us no such thing. And when we understand that if God created the heaven, which was going to be his abode, he was not going to create that as a wasteland, right? He wouldn't. It would have to be perfect. And that is the story of the Golden Age, that whatever was built in the beginning was perfect. And we can even read about that in Ezekiel chapter 28, which is the story of this fallen angel creature called the anointed cherub, who was the father of evil and darkness, in kind of like Morgoth in Tolkien's writing. He was the father of evil. And Morgoth's character, by the way, in Tolkien's writings, and most people don't know who Morgoth is. Morgoth was the predecessor of Sauron, okay? He was the one from whom, let's say, Sauron learned everything that he knew. And so this character, the anointed cherub, so Tolkien based his story of Morgoth upon the story of the anointed cherub in the Bible. So this anointed cherub, we are told, was perfect. You can read that in Ezekiel chapter 28. It says, thou was perfect in thy ways. So this time of perfection, which is logical enough, God creates everything. God is a creator. He's not the destroyer. Yes, he destroys evil in the end, but in the beginning there was no evil. So in the beginning, God was just a builder. So whatever he's going to build is going to be perfect. It is going to be the most technologically advanced place that ever existed in creation up until now. Even today, we are nothing. We are like, primitive compared to that technology that existed back then. So that was the first wonder world, which still exists to this very day, is the heaven. And these angelic creatures, this race of these cherubim and the angels, the archangels, the other, the lower ranked angels. The angels have a hierarchy, and just like in a military order, they're called the host. They're called the army of God. So they are like a military organization in amongst their other functions, and therefore they have a hierarchy. So in this hierarchy, the cherubim are like the generals and the chief of staff, etc., whereas the other angels fall below them, and there'd be some that would be like colonels or majors or lieutenants, etc., sergeants, corporals, and down to foot soldiers, and then that's how the army is constituted. So that's what happened in the beginning. So these angels were assigned with the task of, as God created, of administrating His creation, and they were given the heavenly realms. Okay, so they became responsible for the heavenly realms to this very day, because they manage God's creation. So that is another one of their roles. They're called the host or the army, but they're also His managers of His creation. Just like in a building, you have a building manager, there's a maintenance department, there's a maintenance engineer, like in a high-rise building, in particular down in Manhattan or downtown Toronto here or something. When you have a 100-story building, they're going to have a very sophisticated management maintenance department, and there's going to be engineers that'll be working there. There'll be plumbers, electricians, you name it. Okay, so that's how God's creation is. It is a very technological, the earth itself is a very technological place. It has electricity, it has waters, it has HVAC systems. All these things exist in it, and they don't just run themselves. Somebody runs them, and somebody oversees them, and somebody manages them. And that's what happened in the beginning, from the very beginning, that the oversight of the creation that was to be followed by the creation of the heaven was given to the angels. So they had oversight of all the heavenly realms. And then came the earth. So on the earth, when we read about the beginning of creation, what do we read in Job chapter 38? Like I told you before, it tells us all the sons of God shouted for joy. Why? Like joy is not like ruin, like we find in Genesis 1:2. Joy is not destruction. Joy is not a ruin. And that definition in Genesis chapter 1 verse 2 of the earth being without form and void, it is a ruined wasteland. And it is just common sense to understand that before there can be a ruin, something has to be built. And that, my friends, is what happened. That the worlds that were built in that golden age, which I'm describing to you here, God said He stretched out the heavens. So He began with the heaven, which is like, if you look up and you see the North Star or something, that would point perhaps to the heaven that exists upstairs, up in the celestial realms. That would be the center, and then outward, everything stretched outwards. And these heavenly other bodies, like the stars and the sun and the moon, etc., that were added later on, they became the realms of the angels. In the Bible, angels, stars are symbolic of angels. So each star has at least one angel that is associated with that, and that you could say is responsible for the maintenance of this body that exists up there that we can see. Okay, there is an angel of the sun, for example. There's an angel of the waters, of the winds, in the Bible talks about these things. So that's what happened. So at that time, and the stretching out of the heavens was taking place, it was an age of perfection, because there was no decay in creation yet, because evil had not yet entered. Decay comes through evil, so evil had not started yet. And I might add here that evil came because God planned for it to come. Okay, that is a different teaching again as to why evil exists. There are videos on my website, on my channel, that you can watch as to why evil exists in God's creation. So that was the golden age in which these things of the building of creation, of building of the cosmos, was taking place. Okay, so before these heavens were stretched out, as the Bible tells us, when it talks about being stretched out, it means that it wasn't done instantaneously. It doesn't say in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth and everything suddenly popped up. No, he created the city of heaven, then he created the earth. And the earth he gave to the children of men, as we tell in the Bible. And therefore, in that time, in that age, the earth was also meant for corporeal creatures called the sons of God. So the sons of God, they came down from heaven. That's where they came from. Now, how many stories in mythology do you have about the human beings that came from somewhere out there? How many? Okay? Even like Eric von Daniken, for example, he's built a whole career, made billions of dollars, etc., teaching this, that aliens came from out there. Okay? But these aliens were not like supernatural spirit creatures. They were very much flesh and blood. They had technologies which made them more powerful than the inhabitants that existed in our times. That's why they set themselves up as gods, but they were still corporeal creatures. So the first corporeal inhabitants of the earth were the sons of God. And the sons of God came down to the earth from heaven because they had their origin in heaven, in the city of God. And there they shouted for joy because this world was being created for them. And they came down, and what do people do when they come to let's say when the pilgrims came to America, what did they want to do? They wanted to build, right? They wanted to build. Like where we are sitting today, like, when you go to, say, New York City or something, it didn't exist back then, but over time they built and they built and they built and they built, and the country grew and grew and grew and grew. In North America, like here, 500 years ago, none of this was here. Even probably none of this was here, even like maybe 100 years ago. So cities grow as people build upon them. And that's how the earth grew. As the sons of God that began to multiply, they began to build. Okay, so they built some very, very fantastic worlds. I am sure you could say worlds that would be something like Atlantis, where the myths of Atlantis and Lemuria and Mu, etc. come from, is because these worlds, there were technological marvel worlds where they had like, energy devices which we can't even think about today, where they had like flight and other means of transportation, where everything was perfect because it was the golden age. It was a time of building. Everything was being built at that time. It was not yet being destroyed. Okay? So, as these sons of God came down, they built the earth. And the angels, as the heavens are stretched out, they were instrumental in building the heavens and doing whatever, job that they were given by their creator. Okay? So, that is the story essentially of the golden age. In the golden age, there was no decay, there was no destruction, there was no death, there was no darkness, there was nothing that was evil. It was a time of when the greatest feat of building has ever taken place in history, I believe. When the destruction began, much, much later. So this age of building, it probably lasted longer than any of the subsequent ages, because for two things. One, destruction is a lot faster than building. Like in the Second World War, within a matter of like 3 years essentially, not even like 5 that it lasted, about 3 years or so, they destroyed pretty much all of Europe, all of Russia, all of Japan. Okay? So there was so much destruction that was caused within such a short period of time, within 3 to 4 years. And since then, we are still building to this very day. So the time of building is always longer. And I believe that the extent of the building, that God had set these limits for the heavens and for the earth, the boundaries to which the building would extend. Okay? And I believe these worlds became fully built, fully inhabited, and again, being technologically marvel wonder worlds, the kind which we can't even begin to describe to this very day. And one day when we do have more greater knowledge and we do have access to records of those worlds, we will truly be amazed as to what actually has existed even right here on this earth. So this continued, like I said, from the beginning. In the beginning, God created the heaven, and then he created the earth, and then these creatures came down, then they started building these worlds. Now, this is the story of the Golden Age. And I am of the opinion, this is my opinion, okay, that the ages that followed, okay, they were nowhere near as sophisticated as this first Golden Age. I am of the opinion that whatever was built in those times, what we think of today as Atlantis, for example, that we really don't have pretty much any of that evidence left anymore. And when we have building that is highly technological, like for example, in the modern age, where you see these buildings that are, all around in your cities, etc. These are not made of 1,000-ton blocks of stone that can last for millennia. They are made out of brick and mortar, and they're made out of wood. Okay, very materials that decay rather quickly. That is why in any city you will hardly see a building that is going to be more than 50, 60, 70 years at most. Okay? Houses in modern times, when we no longer even use stone, they don't even last 50 years. All this neighborhood in my city, for example, all of that, these old neighborhoods, they've been pretty much torn down. And people have rebuilt 3 or 4 times already since the city started, maybe even more. So building in technological times, they are not made with materials that are meant to last. So I believe that even in that time, when they must have used more glass and metal than we do in this time, that those buildings would not, the evidence of those is probably already turned to dust. For one thing, that age, which I'm talking about, the Golden Age, it was probably, in time, it was probably, possibly even millions of years ago. So there will be really no evidence left of that much anymore. However, once those worlds were destroyed, the next stage, based upon their own history that they knew, the building methodologies were changed, where they turned to stone instead of glass and metal. When you watch a Star Wars movie, for example, you see these worlds that are created, by the imagination of, is it Mr. Lucas? Yeah, maybe, because somebody's projecting these images into their minds of the writers, and therefore they're able to create them. You understand? You see how much glass is used, how much metal is used. So those are technological worlds, and they will not last for a very, very long time, especially when they had that Death Star, which allegedly blew this planet up or whatever. So what do you think would have been left of the building? Nothing, right? So when these wars came at the end of the Golden Age and the destruction began, it was massive, 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 massive. And it is at that time, the people that existed, they began to learn the lesson that they are not going to build with these easily destroyed materials, that they're going to switch to something which is going to last much longer, which is stone. So on the surface of the earth, they began using massive stones, okay? But they also realized that anything that exists on the surface is very easy to destroy. Therefore, again, in those movies in Star Wars, for example, in the Rebel base, where was it? It was underground, was it not? So they started building underground. Now, evidence of these underground worlds exists all over the earth again. All over. They are right beneath this place right where I'm driving right now. It is quite possible that there are tunnels that litter and there may be cavernous buildings that once were built. So the world itself is like honeycomb. It's linked by these different, what should I say, by that at some point in time they were actually dug out and the underground world was created. But that did not exist in the Golden Age. So the Golden Age history is very simply this, that the Creator, he began the process of creation, he created these creatures. These creatures then also played their part in the building of both the, what we call up there, the cosmos, and what was on the earth. So they built these worlds which were like the world of Atlantis. They were fantastic worlds, and they grew and they grew and they grew till the day there came a day, and we read about this day in the book of Ezekiel in chapter 28. It tells us, thou was perfect in thy ways till iniquity was found in thee. So there came a day when the sons of God and the angels that existed at that time, some of them, not all of them, some of them turned to the dark side. Okay, where do you think the story of the Dark Emperor comes from? The evil emperor for Star Wars. All these stories are lifted straight from the pages of the Bible. I don't have time to go into it, but I could show you, where the Star Wars story comes from. It's in the Bible. Story of Darth Vader and the story of the evil emperor and all that. It's all there. Okay, so that's what happened. That this anointed cherub, he became the first evil emperor, and then began the process of destruction, because evil brings with it destruction. Did it happen right away? No. Did it happen over many, many years and many ages of time? Yes. So that world that was built in those worlds that were built at the time of the Golden Age of creation, they began to be destroyed. Okay? Evil brings something which is jealousy, which is envy, which is hatred, and factionalism. So all these stories that you read about, like I said, in Tolkien, in Star Wars, etc., this factioning of God's creation began to occur at that time. And these factions began to war with each other. These are the wars of the gods that we read about in mythology, for instance. And what happens when war comes? Destruction comes. So there came an age at the end of the Golden Age when evil entered in, it transitioned into the Silver Age. And from then begins deterioration, decay, destruction of creation. And since that very time, by the way, since that very time, we have been in a state of destruction, a state of decay to this very day. And by the way, one of the things that's very much missing in any mythology, as well as in the stories of Tolkien, or in Star Wars actually touches upon it, but most of them, they leave out a very, very important detail. The Bible tells us that the love of money is the root of all evil. They leave out the history of money. The Bible does not. It tells you that money and banking and trading and commerce, it was started by this race of angels led by this anointed cherub. They are the ones that started it. Okay? So you want to understand how the world comes to be the way it is today. This history stretches all the way back when evil entered and God's creation transitioned from the golden to the silver age. It is all these things happened in the Silver Age, where money was introduced, where the process of the buying and selling of God's creation, which he had given freely for all to use, all of his creatures. The creatures, some of them decided that they're going to begin to partition it, and they're going to sell off pieces of it. You have to go and buy a piece of land today. You have to go and buy a house or a business or something like that today that somebody says that they own. Ultimately, there is only one owner, and that is the Creator. So this system of money and banking and commerce and trading and buying and selling. It is created, it began way back when, at the time of this angelic race led by this creature called the anointed cherub, and all these things. Idolatry, worship of creatures as God, began under him. So these stories and these histories, we understand that when we start to piece it together, the purpose of studying history is not just to understand what happened, but what were the causes. And you want to understand the causes? Then I think there is no better document than the Bible to explain those causes. Mythology, they can talk about weapons and wars and everything else, but they will leave out the root causes. As the Bible says, the love of money is the root of all evil. They will never explain to you where money came from, but the Bible does. All right, so that is the story of the first age. The first age, the golden age, was an age of creation, where everything that we see today, actually what we see today probably is not what was created back then, because most of it was destroyed at some point later in time. But that gives you a picture. Like, there was the heavens, which had these heavenly bodies, like the stars, the sun, and the moon. But the sun and the moon we see up there today are not the same ones that were created in the beginning. And the Bible tells us that the heavens themselves were destroyed at some point in time. Okay? So that's the history of the golden age. I'm going to end this here as an introduction, that there was a period of time which was rather lengthy, probably the longest of all the ages, probably lasted at least tens of, in terms of time as we measure it today, okay? Time measurement may have been different back then, but as we measure it today in terms of today's Earth years, it could have been tens of thousands, 100,000, millions of years. I have no idea how long this age lasted, but it began with the creation of the heaven, from where the creatures that would later on inhabit both the heavenly realms and the earth were created, the angels and the sons of God. And then came the earth, and then came the building of the worlds that existed, some up in the heavenly places and some right here on earth. Okay, but we are concerned primarily with the ones that exist here on the earth. And then we will get into it, like I've touched upon it, how the worlds that exist under the sea, for example, or inside in subterranean regions, how were they created? There was a time when they were built, right? Bible talks about hell, for example, or the depths of the earth and all that kind of, even mythologies, everybody talks about the underworld, etc. Where did the underworld, how did it come about? And we can answer those questions. And that's why I find this history to be so very fantastic. But I believe it's not just fantastic, it is also the real history. And we got to thank God for it, that we have this ability to piece these things together that he has hidden in his word, and we have to just dig it out, and then the picture emerges, and it's a beautiful picture. Or I'll continue, I'll talk about the transition from the golden into the silver age next time. And just to leave it here, that most of the stories that people hear about Atlantis, etc., I believe they are based upon the time which was the time of the golden age as it was transitioning into the silver age. Okay, there was still high technology and still not massive destruction, but later it came. Okay, thank you for listening. This is Paul Sindhu. So as I was putting this video together and adding these clips to give a visual representation of what I've been talking about in this video, one of these things which you see on the screen, this sci-fi fiction, animation with all these fantastic airplanes and bombs, etc., and the massive destruction that is being caused, I believe that again that this is really not fiction, that the destruction, first of all, the scale of the building of the ruins that we see, it is so massive that we can't even begin to fathom how they must have been built. But just then consider how the weapons and the technology that must have existed in those days just to be able to destroy it. So this scene, these type of movies, etc., they are again not necessarily fiction. They may have some kind of historical basis that these things indeed did happen, and this is how these worlds came to be in ruins, such as, for example, you see all these giant 500-ton obelisks and everything and other stones that have been cut, but they just scattered all over. And there's it's as if somebody just in the middle of a construction project just decided to abandon it. And that is, again, these reasons is that these are a result of some kind of cataclysmic destructions, and most likely these destructions were caused by some type of wars between these different factions that arose, even between the angelic races and the sons of God human races, who later on became the gods. And I think that's where the stories of Titans, for example, comes, that the Titans were the first generation of the gods, and these would be like the angels. And they were the first rulers. They're the first ones that set themselves up as the evil emperors. And then they were dethroned by the sons of God humans, who were led by Lucifer, whose story we will continue in the Silver Age. And then you shall see that this type of destruction, that the evidence of which is to be found on the earth even to this very day, it was not some type of minor event. The technologies and the people, like in Greek gods or in any kind of mythologies, Hindu mythology, etc., the gods always possess amazing technologies, and those are factual because, as I said, that the golden age, which was the beginning of creation, it began in high technology. It began in the greatest knowledge that God's creatures have had up until this present time. And not even at this time do we have the same amount of knowledge as far as technology, etc., is concerned. And this is something which God deliberately has withheld from us, as, for example, the Tower of Babel, which was designed to really dumb man down. Otherwise, we would have brought this destruction upon ourselves much sooner than God wanted to see it happen. It is going to happen, and this type of destruction that you saw, for example, in these little clips here, it is definitely going to happen. And the question is this the first time that it'll happen, or has it already happened in the past? All right, thank you. I'm glad. Or lastly, I want to add is that at the very end of this clip, you will see after this bombing how the ruins look very much like the ruins you would see, for example, in South America and Peru, or in the Middle East, or in China, Russia, etc. They're very, very similar. And is it because the cause of these ruins is very much as depicted in this sci-fi clip? All right, lastly, I want to say is that whether one believes it or not, like the history that we can piece together from the Bible, as I said, it does explain everything. It explains the origins of these different creatures that have been worshipped as gods, for example, throughout history. It explains the origins of money, of banking, of our modern economic systems and such. So the history is not just one of speculation. It gives us a very, very clear picture of what happened, but more importantly, why it happened. And the purpose of my doing this video is not for proselytizing or anything like that. I just want to share with you the knowledge that I have gained from it, and also from the study of other, mythologies, etc., as I mentioned at the beginning. And I am glad, because this history does make sense to me, and ultimately it has given me a purpose of my life, which I don't think is available anywhere else. Okay, have a wonderful day, and I'll be back in the next few days with a video on the Silver Age.
The Bible, times are getting harder. Strange things we see each day. Unusual kinds of weather. Evil makes the headlines today. The whole world wants a man to step out with a to put the world in peace. But please don't take his number, 'cause it's like signing a death release. If you live your life for Christ, you will get the crown of life. He's coming back for you. He's coming back for you. He's coming back for